The branches of a beech tree shook violently. A set of long claws bent one of them downward, and dozens of leaves were devoured. It would take many more bites to satiate the giant ground sloth, an enormous creature that could reach 5 meters above the ground when standing on its hind legs. Nearby, several others, bulky and gentle, munched on a small patch of trees. By the time they started ambling away out across the surrounding grassland, the stand looked much barer than it had that morning. Before the herd made it far, they were startled by an alarming sound. A straggler still at the trees had cried out at the feeling of a sudden, terrible pain. The large female ground sloth turned her head and saw a wooden spear shaft stuck in her back. Before she had a chance to react, 2 more spears flew toward her, one landing fatally in the chest. She struggled to remain on her feet for a moment, but soon crashed to the ground. Her last sight, 3 spear-wielding men approaching. Ambushes like these were incredibly effective against ground sloths. Though tough hand-to-hand combatants, they had little defense against projectiles. The men scared away the other sloths and began the lengthy process of skinning and dismembering their game. They would first carry the meaty hind legs back to camp, before returning with others to collect more. But these plans were cut short a few minutes after felling the giant, when they heard a growl. Hearts racing, the men jumped at this sound and clamored for their spears. A saber-toothed cat, camouflaged against the grass, stood menacingly a few paces away, mouth opened wide, brandishing fearsome canine teeth. The hunters had to make a quick decision. They had 2 options: fight or run. Thinking of his family, the eldest man signaled the others to back away, ceding their hard-earned prey. He had known too many brash young men that had died, wrestled to the ground and strangled by these massive predators. They would return in the morning, after the cat had eaten its fill, to see if there was anything left to scavenge. These men lived 12,800 years ago in the Pampas grasslands of northern Argentina. They belonged to the fishtail culture and were adept hunters of ground sloths, horses, and mastodon. Their actions likely contributed to the rapid extinction of several species of megafauna, extinctions that forever changed American nature. Welcome to Our Prehistory, Episode 43, American Megafauna Extinctions. The first humans to reach America entered a truly pre-human environment. Before their arrival, dozens of enormous animal species had come to dominate the landscape south of the Canadian ice sheets. Larger than any American animals alive today, these creatures trampled and consumed vast amounts of vegetation, literally shaping every biome of the Western Hemisphere. The earliest American cultures emerged at a time when this megafauna was abundant. Intimate interactions with them no doubt impacted their way of life, customs, and worldview. But coexistence between humans and giant herbivores and carnivores was short-lived, and in the wake of a dramatic extinction event, the natural environment of America was left impoverished. Today we'll take a deep dive into the topic of these megafaunal extinctions. Which animals were lost, and when exactly did they disappear? We will also explore the contentious debate surrounding the role of human hunting in the disappearance of these animals, which has implications for how we view the impact of hunter-gatherers on the environment. Before the invention of agriculture, before the rise of industry, were humans already capable of irreversibly transforming the planet's natural systems? As we will see, the answer seems to be yes. To start, let's establish some basic terminology. Paleontologists generally use the word megafauna to refer to any animal larger than 45 kilograms. Using this definition, megafauna includes animals of a wide range of sizes, from wild pigs to woolly mammoths. Also, when discussing megafauna extinctions, experts prefer to quantify genera instead of species, because differentiating species within a genus can be difficult based only on fossils. Given those criteria, the first thing we notice when examining these megafauna extinctions is the remarkable severity of this phenomenon. Around 130,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens was still an African species, around 47 genera of megafauna lived in North America, and around 60 in South America. Today, 70% of those animals are gone. Only 13 genera survive in North America. In South America, those extinctions were more severe. 82% of megafauna genera disappeared, leaving behind only 10. No animals larger than 500 kilograms survived in South America. At the continental level, only Australia lost a larger proportion. Over the past 130,000 years, animals weighing more than 45 kilograms were devastated. Importantly, the loss of American megafauna was part of a global trend. Known as the Late Quaternary Extinctions, this event was unique because it disproportionately affected large terrestrial animals. This was a dramatic reversal of long-term evolutionary trends. Since the extinction of the dinosaurs, land animals had gradually reached bigger and bigger sizes. But during the Late Quaternary, the larger the animal, the more likely it was to die out. In the Americas, all species larger than 1,000 kilograms went extinct, including various types of elephants, ground sloths, and giant armadillos. Across both continents, more than half of all species larger than 100 kilograms were lost, whereas less than 10% of non-megafauna disappeared. The particular vulnerability of large-bodied animals wasn't an aspect of previous extinction events over the past 65 million years, which often included the loss of both marine and terrestrial animals. The unique size bias of the late quaternary extinction is often used to support the idea that human hunting, not climate, was the primary cause of this particular episode. But first, what exactly were these giant animals that ancestors of Native Americans found as they explored this pre-human land? Most of the extinct megafauna, and the largest, were herbivores. Some were close relatives to those that survived on other continents, and others were strange and unique to the Western Hemisphere. The largest American animals were relatives of elephants, of which at least 5 species lived across North and South America. All of them had trunks and tusks and weighed more than 3,000 kilograms, or 3 tons, when fully grown. Some were adapted to grasslands, others to forests, some to cold, others to the tropics. The largest of the American elephants was the Columbian mammoth. It stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder and weighed 10 tons, twice as much as African elephants. They primarily lived across the open landscapes of the United States and Mexico, where people of the Clovis culture hunted them. After elephants, the next largest animals when humans arrived were ground sloths. Relatives of the tree-living varieties that survive today, ground sloths walked on 4 feet, but supported most of their weight on their hind legs, and could easily stand upright, supported by a strong tail. This allowed them to feed on leaves high above the ground. Somewhere around 14 species lived during the Pleistocene, some in grasslands, others in forests, and most in South America, where this group of animals evolved. The largest species, the giant ground sloth, stood 4 meters tall on 2 feet, and weighed 4 tons, as much as a woolly mammoth. But they came in much smaller varieties as well, the smallest weighing 150 kilograms. Ground sloths were bizarre, unlike any large herbivore alive today. They possessed long, sharp claws on their forelimbs that could be used to pull leaves towards their mouth, but which also served to defend themselves from predators, and, surprisingly, to dig enormous burrows where they slept. They were probably slow-moving, though not as sluggish as their modern cousins. Because they couldn't rely on speed, some species evolved osteoderms, which are bony nodules in their skin, as a form of armor against the teeth of carnivores. Some species probably lived in herds, providing group defense against predators. Interestingly, people of the fishtail culture in the southern cone of South America hunted multiple ground sloth species. Another group of enormous animals, primarily found in South America, are known to paleontologists as glyptodonts, but more commonly as giant armadillos. These creatures were in fact closely related to the much smaller armadillos that survive today, and they were encased in a rigid, bony armor. Some members of this taxon, which included around 12 species, could reach truly giant dimensions, weighing as much as 2 tons. The extent of their defensive anatomy is impressive. Even their heads bore bony caps, and some species swung heavy club-shaped tails, probably to repel attacking predators. Aside from elephants, sloths, and giant armadillos, a few other American animals broke the 1-ton mark. Across Canada, the United States, and Mexico, a large species of camel roamed, quite similar to their Arabian relatives. In addition, across a similar area lived 2 species of musk ox and 2 types of bison that are now extinct. In South America, 2 huge and strange herbivores ranged up until the time humans arrived. Neither was closely related to any creature alive today. One, given the scientific name Macrauchenia, looked like a humpless camel with long legs and neck, and a short trunk, not unlike that of a tapir. It could run quickly and probably kicked its hooves for defense. The other one, named Toxodon, was much less agile and resembled a rhinoceros, with short legs, bulky body, and large head. Among the less imposing megafauna, those under 1 ton, we find many animals that are similar to ones we know today. Around 5 species of horse survived until the arrival of humans, but quickly went extinct. All horses in the Americas today descend from those brought from Europe in the past 500 years. In addition, 2 species of llama went extinct, including one that was twice as big as those that survive now. Several other animals went extinct after the arrival of humans, including a giant beaver that weighed 200 kilograms, a species of moose with notably elaborate antlers, 2 species of tapir from the United States and Mexico, which were larger than their surviving relatives, 2 types of pig-like peccaries, and a giant capybara, twice as big as its evolutionary cousin that today is the largest living rodent. Though not as diverse, several American carnivores also went extinct alongside the herbivores. Like the animals they preyed on, it was the largest predators that disappeared. The most massive were the short-faced bears. 3 South American species ranged from 100 to 400 kilograms, but the single North American species, known as the giant short-faced bear, was larger than polar and grizzly bears, with males weighing around 800 kilograms. Short-faced bears were likely omnivorous, with the potential to be lethal, fast predators. Also, several cat species disappeared after the arrival of humans. Most notably, 3 species of saber-toothed cat with terrifyingly elongated, blade-like canine teeth. Remarkably muscular, these animals were not designed for long sprints, like lions or cheetahs, but for ambush hunting. They could wrestle much larger animals to the ground and killed with fatal bites to the throat. The largest saber-toothed cat lived in South America and weighed 400 kilograms, similar to the size of cave lions in Eurasia. In North America, the American lion and American cheetah resembled their African counterparts. Finally, one canid also went extinct. The dire wolf lived across North America and was slightly larger than the surviving gray wolf. The Americas before and after the Megafauna extinction were 2 different worlds. For the first humans to reach these continents, it was common to encounter animals that towered over them, and others whose strength and aggression posed terrifying menaces. Today, the largest animal in North America is the bison, at around 800 kilograms. In South America, it's the tapir, at only 300 kilograms. The largest surviving cat is the jaguar, at 150 kilograms. We often think of the indigenous people of North America hunting bison on the plains and deer in the forests. But when the ancestors of these people first arrived to this continent, they encountered a much different set of large animals. Some of these they hunted. Others killed them. It's hard for us to imagine the feeling of coming face to face with a saber-toothed cat. But it was a reality for people 13,000 years ago. The American megafauna extinctions dramatically reversed long-standing biological trends. It seems logical that such a striking change must have been caused by some equally powerful obvious force. Yet, there's a heated debate among the experts as to what triggered the loss of these animals. 2 main theories dominate this discussion. One says that human hunting was the primary cause. Another that climate change was the main culprit. Importantly, these opinions are often nuanced. Many people believe that a combination of both hunting and climate contributed to the extinctions. Furthermore, other human activities besides hunting, notably the starting of wildfires, may have contributed to megafauna decline. This debate remains active, and many lines of evidence need to be considered. One key question when evaluating these theories is, exactly when did the American megafauna go extinct? Did disappearance of these animals coincide with human arrival or with major climate change? This has turned out to be difficult to fully answer. Determining when a species went extinct, when the last individual of a species died, paleontologists depend on the ages of fossils. For common animals, whose bones have been discovered at many sites, extinction likely occurred soon after the date of the youngest fossil. But for rarer species, precisely estimating the date of extinction is not possible. In America, several genera of megafauna were believed to have lived in the past 130,000 years, but have only 2, 1, or even 0 bones with known ages. Besides fossils, another clue hidden in prehistoric sediments can be used to study the decline of megafauna. A genus of fungus called Sporormiella grows primarily in animal dung, and its spores are more abundant in layers of soil from periods when megafauna was more common. So dung fungus can serve as a proxy for changes in the general abundance of megafauna. Given all this, what can we say about the timing of American megafauna extinctions? First of all, we know that a substantial proportion of megafauna genera coexisted with humans. Based on the fossil record, around half of those that went extinct during the late Quaternary were still alive 14,000 years ago, 19 of 34 in North America and 22 of 60 in South America. Remember that currently, the most popular opinion among archaeologists is that humans arrived in America around 16,000 years ago. For the other genera of megafauna, those for which there is no evidence of coexistence with humans, we generally have few dated fossils, meaning that we don't know their date of extinction, or if they coexisted with humans. Some might have died before human arrival, but importantly, most of the well-documented species disappeared after the arrival of humans. In North America, the evidence reveals a strikingly rapid loss of several megafauna species over a short period. For about 17 genera, the youngest known fossil is somewhere between 13,500 and 12,500 years old. Combining all the dates on extinct megafauna bones shows that their numbers were actually increasing as they recovered from the cold, dry last glacial maximum. But around 13,000 years ago, this trend reversed dramatically, and within 1,000 years, the number of megafauna had collapsed. Records of dung fungus from the United States suggest that megafauna declines may have begun as early as 14,000 years ago in the east and around 13,000 years ago in the west. In South America, the patterns are similar, though it seems the extinction period was more drawn out. In general, megafauna peaked around 12,900 years ago, nearly simultaneously with North America, before a dramatic decline that continued until about 11,400 years ago. Dung fungus records in Brazil and Peru generally support this finding. They show that megafauna declines may have begun as early as 15,000 years ago, but accelerated around 13,000 years ago. Unlike in North America, the youngest known fossils for around a dozen genera come from the early Holocene, but those seem to have gone extinct by 8,000 years ago. So in sum, most extinct genera for which we can reliably estimate extinction dates seem to have disappeared between 14,000 and 8,000 years ago. That is, 500 to 7,000 years after the arrival of humans, depending on the species and whether you prefer the Clovis first or pre-Clovis arrival scenario. Furthermore, the most rapid decline in megafauna numbers came between 13,000 and 12,000 years ago, which notably coincides closely with a rapid increase in the human population, as seen in the number of archaeological sites and the appearance of the Clovis, fishtail, and western stemmed cultures. These findings, combined with the fact that all of these genera had survived in the Americas for hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions, has led most experts to believe that humans must have contributed in some way to their extinction. Yet, despite this information, some archaeologists and paleontologists still argue against a significant human contribution, proposing that climate played the primary role. It's true that the climate was changing during the period of the extinctions. In North America and the northern part of South America, the most important climatic event related to this debate is the Younger Dryas, a cold, arid period that lasted for about 1,000 years. It was a reversal of the wider trend of global warming that characterized the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. This return to glacial temperatures caused abrupt changes in North American vegetation, and likely reduced the productivity of plants on which megafauna relied for sustenance. Importantly, the Younger Dryas started 12,900 years ago in North America, almost exactly at the point when the general number of megafauna started to decline. This is why this debate remains unsettled. The start of the Younger Dryas, the start of megafauna extinctions, and the growth of the human population in North America occur almost simultaneously, making it difficult to use timing alone as a conclusive argument for either position. Recently, a group of researchers used data from the 5 most well-dated extinct North American megafauna to precisely estimate when their numbers began to decline. They compared this to the start date of the Clovis culture, which began 200 years before the Younger Dryas. These researchers found that the populations of mammoths, horses, and saber-toothed cats started to decline after the beginning of Clovis, but before the onset of the Younger Dryas, whereas mastodon and sloth numbers began falling just after the start of the Younger Dryas. This data seems to support the possibility of mixed causes, but primarily human-driven extinctions for 3 genera. In the part of South America that falls below the equator, climatic trends followed a different tempo than in the northern hemisphere. Instead of the Younger Dryas, the southern hemisphere went through a different cold phase at an earlier point. Known as the Antarctic Cold Reversal, it lasted from 14,700 to 13,000 years ago, and had similar but milder effects than the Younger Dryas. Importantly, the extinctions in South America mostly occurred after the Antarctic Cold Reversal, during the gradual warming leading into the Holocene. This means that the loss of megafauna in North and South America occurred under different environmental contexts, despite being nearly simultaneous. In the north, the climate was cooling, and in the south it was warming. Some experts propose that environmental changes in South America related to increasing temperatures contributed to megafauna extinctions. Most of the large animals that went extinct in South America were adapted to open ecosystems such as grasslands, steppe, and savannas, environments that shrunk during the transition from the Pleistocene to Holocene. Around 12,400 years ago, tree coverage started expanding in Patagonia, the Pampas, and southern Andes. So instead of lower ecological productivity, like that caused by the Younger Dryas, perhaps a shift from steppe and grassland to forest negatively impacted megafauna in South America. This is not an outlandish idea. A similar situation occurred with the loss of Eurasian steppe at the end of the Pleistocene, which contributed to the extinction of multiple cold-adapted megafauna species. But as in North America, disentangling the impacts of humans and environmental change on megafauna is complicated. A study of the most well-dated species in Patagonia, including horses and ground sloths, estimated that the final extinction date of several species fell around 12,300 years ago, right after forests started expanding, suggesting that environmental change could have played a role. On the other hand, the general decline in megafauna in this region began around 600 years earlier and is closely correlated with the appearance of the fishtail culture. These detailed analyses of cultural, climatic, and extinction events have led to a growing acceptance that humans and climate acted as a 1-2 punch, devastating several megafauna species. However, there are still those who prefer exclusively anthropogenic or climatic explanations, so let's examine some other arguments, besides timing, used in this debate. First, those who argue that human activity alone caused the extinctions point out that all of the species that went extinct during the late Quaternary had already survived dozens of climatic fluctuations without going extinct, and that there was nothing unprecedented about the Younger Dryas cooling or Holocene warming that could explain the sudden loss of so many species. On the other hand, archaeologists who favor climate as the primary cause question the extent to which humans hunted megafauna. These experts reviewed the data and found 16 sites in North America with clear signs that humans used extinct megafauna for food. This included cases where spear points were found immediately next to animal bones, where bones had cut marks made by stone tools, or where bones were scorched due to cooking on a campfire. Furthermore, this evidence only indicates that humans consumed 5 of the 34 genera of megafauna that went extinct, including mammoth, mastodon, camels, and horses. The authors of this article also argue that at some of these sites, people probably scavenged from carcasses, meaning that humans weren't responsible for the animal's death. A similar examination of the South American record found 17 sites where humans exploited megafauna, including 15 of the 60 extinct genera, from horses to sloths, mastodon, llamas, and giant armadillos. This information is interpreted differently by the two sides of the debate. Some see it as insufficient evidence to show that people were prolific killers of megafauna that could have hunted dozens of species to extinction. They also argue that the number of humans in America was too small to have caused such rapid declines of animal populations. It's estimated that hundreds of millions of individual large animals roamed the Americas around 13,000 years ago. Alternatively, those who believe humans drove the extinctions take the numbers of known megafauna kill sites as consistent with intensive hunting, given the short amount of time that humans coexisted with these large animals, and the poor conditions for bone preservation in parts of the Americas. They point out that few well-dated archaeological sites in general exist that overlapped with extinct megafauna. For example, only 10 securely dated Clovis sites exist, and bones from this period were not preserved in southeastern United States. Interestingly, the earliest American point styles, Clovis, fishtail, and hasket, were all larger than the spear points that were used by cultures that followed them, suggesting that they were designed by people who focused on hunting large game. Furthermore, humans may not have had to hunt huge numbers of animals to have catastrophic impacts over the course of a few centuries. Large animals are especially vulnerable to overhunting due to their long life cycles. Compared to smaller animals, megafauna tend to have longer lifespans, longer periods until sexual maturity, and fewer offspring per brood. All of these factors mean that their populations grew slowly. Despite these arguments, some still find it hard to believe that humans so quickly overhunted so many species. One idea that might help explain the severity of these extinctions is that the arrival of humans likely had several indirect effects, a chain reaction that led to the extinction of animals they never hunted. For example, the extinction of the largest American carnivores, including short-faced bears and saber-toothed cats, most certainly was not due to hunting, but to the loss of all the large herbivores on which they preyed. Also, the disappearance of species that humans hunted, like elephants, horses, and sloths, had effects on the ecosystems where they ate and trampled enormous quantities of plants. These giant herbivores consumed so much vegetation that they helped keep open landscapes open. One study estimated that the modern savanna of Brazil would have 30% fewer trees and shrubs if megafauna still lived there. Also, by constantly grazing, megafauna increased the amount of re-sprouting vegetation and favored plant species adapted to disturbance, which tend to be highly palatable compared to other plants. It's possible that the loss of open, disturbed patches of vegetation had negative effects on smaller herbivores, reliant on nutritious regrowth. Finally, by reducing the amount of flammable biomass, megafauna reduced the frequency of wildfires, which increased after their extinctions. This is where figuring out the causal links in the chain reaction gets tricky. In some places, the rise in wildfire frequency preceded the decline of megafauna and might instead have been set by humans when they arrived in America. Also, we know that a warming climate, not just the loss of megafauna, can lead to the expansion of forests. Deciphering the multiple interacting effects of humans, megafauna, and climate on vegetation and fire is difficult. Even though the timing of human arrival certainly implicates us in megafauna extinctions to some extent, the relative impacts of hunting versus indirect effects of human activity remain undetermined. While the intricacies of this debate are many and complex, I think there is a clear conclusion that can be found. It seems hard to justify the position that climate change alone could have caused this loss of megafauna. The facts that nearly all well-dated extinctions come soon after the arrival of humans, that the loss of species was uniquely severe and biased toward the largest animals, and that climate changes were not uniquely severe, all point the finger at humans as the primary culprits in the American megafauna extinctions. Environmental changes could have played a smaller role, but we need to start wrapping our head around the idea that a tiny number of hunter-gatherers had massive, irreversible impacts on the biology of the two American continents. To finish, let's take a moment to compare the megafauna extinctions of America to those of other continents. This global view will introduce a new wrinkle into this story. It turns out that the American narrative of megafauna extinctions doesn't match that from other parts of the world. The place that has the most in common with America in this regard is Sahul. Australia experienced similar severe extinctions that followed soon after the arrival of humans. Around 24 species went extinct, several around 42,000 years ago, about 8,000 years after humans arrived. But the late Quaternary extinctions were not always severe, rapid, and soon after the arrival of Homo sapiens. In Eurasia, the loss of megafauna was less extreme, more gradual, and culminated tens of thousands of years after the out-of-Africa migration. Eurasia only lost 35% of megafauna genera in the past 130,000 years. Some of these in northern Eurasia, such as the loss of woolly rhinoceros, woolly mammoth, and cave lions, were clearly related to the warming climate at the end of the Pleistocene and the decline of cold steppe habitat. In South Asia, megafauna survived comparably well, and animals like elephants, rhinoceros, and tigers have survived to the present. Even better, in Africa, only 21% of megafauna genera went extinct during the late Quaternary. This discrepancy raises a key question. If we are so sure that humans in America caused a rapid extinction of megafauna, why didn't our species start overhunting large animals when they evolved in Africa and then spread out across Eurasia? What made the megafauna of Sahul and America so much more vulnerable? These findings show that prehistoric humans did not always decimate megafauna populations. The most popular theory to explain this difference invokes the impact on the Old World of other hominid species besides Homo sapiens. Africa was the cradle of human evolution and has been inhabited by members of the genus Homo for several million years. Eurasia has been invaded by several of those hominid species going back almost 2 million years. Sahul and the Americas, on the other hand, hosted no other hominins before the arrival of Homo sapiens. So maybe the reason why the megafauna of Sahul and America were especially defenseless was because they had never lived alongside intelligent hominins like Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, and never developed ways to avoid being hunted. Furthermore, Africa and Eurasia may have experienced earlier extinctions at the hands of archaic hominins, leaving fewer vulnerable species to suffer the more recent effects of Homo sapiens. Starting between 2 to 4 million years ago, some of the largest animals in Africa and Eurasia went extinct, including a species of giraffe and elephant in Africa and a giant beaver in Eurasia. Recent studies are pointing the finger at Homo erectus and Neanderthals for these earlier, more gradual reductions of megafauna diversity. Regardless of how these events transpired in the Old World, the arrival of humans in the Americas contributed to the radical extinctions of the late Quaternary. Our species posed a unique force within the natural contexts of the New World, a force unlike that seen by animals before. Our species could hunt the largest land-dwelling animals of the period. We were an invasive apex predator in a land full of naive large animals that couldn't adapt quickly enough. Our arrival shocked American ecosystems, reorganized food chains, and left a permanent legacy of biological simplification. In our next episode, we will look at the cultures that emerged in North America after the extinction of megafauna, as Clovis traditions faded away. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider becoming a patron of the show. Your support will allow me to continue bringing you our prehistory.